India's semiconductor ambitions seem to have hit a roadblock in a bid to attract more big-ticket investment for chip making. Aiming to make India a key player in the global supply chain, government had announced a $10 billion incentive plan. The move aimed to provide financial support for new semiconductor facilities to cover 50% of the project costs. However, the applications they received have their own issues. The Electronics and Information Technology Ministry has reopened the semiconductor incentive scheme and will start accepting new applications as well as give time to applications that have already been submitted. The deadline opens today on 1st of June until the existing issues are either resolved or it receives good applications under the India's ambitious semiconductor mission plan. We are, of course, discussing where our plans are at the moment, how ambitious are those plans and how attainable in the long run. Joining me at this point in time is Pallava Bagla, who's a senior journalist. Also joining us is Barnik Chitran Maitra from Arthur D. Little. With me is my colleague Krishnakumar in the studio. Krishna, let me begin with the ambitious plans that India has. $10 billion is up for grabs, but there doesn't seem to be a single application that meets the threshold.
Right. I think at this stage what's happening here is a continuous process of evolution of the entire semiconductor plan that India has. India's Semiconductor Mission, as it's called, the ISM. This seems to be like 2.0, because what they started out with was sending out, asking people to invest in 28 nm chips, the smaller 28 nm chips. But this time around, the plan is to invite chip makers who can make greater than 40 nm chips, so bigger chips. So that's what they're trying to do in this, and that in a sense expands the scope of the applicants. That's the logic from the government side. They really are evolving this process. Bear in mind, this announcement has just come after Union IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav's trip to the US in the beginning of the month of June, on the 10th of May. In fact, he went around and met a whole bunch of chip makers in the US and a couple of universities as well. And he's been making this point that, yes, India is poised to become the next global semiconductor hub. That could happen anywhere in the time span of 5 to 10 years. That's the kind of time span that India Semiconductor Mission is giving itself. But the fact of the matter is that the Indian government is very clear that it wants to have a sustainable development of this global semiconductor hub in India, which basically means that it's not just about giving out tenders and inviting people to come and start manufacturing and putting up factories and just like letting that mushroom as fast as possible. They want this to be a development of the ecosystem as well that feeds into these factories that make these chips, which means that you're talking about the talent pool. Ever since the India Semiconductor Mission policy was announced, you've seen a bunch of universities across the country opening up courses on semiconductor chips for students to apply to. So you're talking about the development of the ecosystem, talent, people, facilities, infrastructure, everything. So India is looking at holistically developing its global semiconductor ambitions, and the latest announcement to me I see as a product of the conversations that went on between India's IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav and all the chip makers in the US. Bear in mind, the Indian Consul General in San Francisco is also tying up with the Silicon Valley chip makers to bring those technologies, to ask those people to invest in chip manufacturing units in India. So there is a concerted effort that is being made by the government, and I guess with learnings, with every single stage of the learnings, they want to apply those learnings to India's Semiconductor Mission and make it bigger, larger. Even as we're on this journey, we begin this journey, Shweta.
Well, we have so far been importing chips in large numbers, and India is very ambitious because, as Krishna correctly pointed out, we're not just hoping to get more imports of semiconductor chips, we're also hoping to build an entire ecosystem for which we need technology either driven to Indian markets or for the players who have sent out their application to find a technology partner. And I want to come to, at this point in time, Barnik, one of the key constraints with the applications that came in, 3 applications that came in when the window was first opened for 45 days, was that from Vedanta, which wanted to tie up with Foxconn. However, they could not meet the criteria of either finding a technology partner or finding a license to technology. So, and that is one of, those are 2 important steps, or either of the 2 steps needed to get government funding. Where do you see the efforts that are being made by Vedanta and other applicants heading from here on? How difficult is it to get technology? All right, I don't think Barnik can hear us. Barnik, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry, was that addressed to me?
It was for you. Absolutely, yes.
No, so I think semiconductor manufacturing is not an easy job. It needs technology, it needs stabilization. Unfortunately, there are only a limited handful of players around the world who have the necessary technology. TSMC from Taiwan has 50% of market share. You can partner with Samsung and LG. And unless an Indian player has the ability to partner with a technology provider like a South Korean chaebol like an LG or a Samsung or a TSMC, it is very hard for us to envisage that any such semiconductor fab will be successful, right? So if you look at the recent news, I think the government's stance is probably the right stance to insist on a technology partner. And I believe that the Indian players need to, particularly when you're doing a fab, you need to have a technology partner. Now, the only exception may be to get into outsourced semiconductor assembly services, the OSAT services, which is what the Tata Group is likely to get into. There, by the way, I don't think you need to have a technology partner like a fab manufacturer there. Even a partnership with a Foxconn who does this in Taiwan is helpful. So again, we believe that to do a fabrication unit or a fab, you need to have a technology partner. It's a handful of players. I think the Indian players need to work hard to get them. If you're doing an outsourced facility which is for semiconductor assembly and testing, that maybe you can do without a technology partner.
Okay. What exactly are stalling Vedanta's plan, before I move to Pallav and really go into the ambitions that we harbor as far as chip making in India is concerned? What exactly is hampering Vedanta and also ISMC? Because ISMC is also hoping to, get the application going, get the right sort of funding from the government. But from what we understand, its ongoing takeover by Intel could be hampering or stalling the process.
Yeah, so for Vedanta, I think, again, I don't know if the news is formal that the application has got rejected, but it has got rejected for the absence of a technology partner, right?
There's no
So again,
confirmation on the rejection. That Barnik, we are given to understand because we had Rajeev Chandrasekhar, MOS Information Technology, come on record to say that the application has not been rejected. They've just been given more time.
yeah. So I think again, I think if you look at the policy, there is very clear requirement that you need to have a clear technology partner, which means Foxconn does not meet the criteria of the government to be a technology partner. You also need to have a very clear manufacturing license, which or ability to manufacture license given to you by an end customer, which I don't think they have. Now, of the two, I think getting a technology partner would be a little harder because I think the JV does not have participation of TSMC or any of the Korean chaebols. So I think that would make it slightly harder for them to do. On the ISMC front, I think even my understanding is that the Intel takeover is what's delaying them. And remember, any semiconductor fab, for it to be successful, the 50% government subsidy is a critical element of the entire IRR of the project, right? And I've been being a consultant and looked at IRR of such projects, right? If you do not get 30-40% subsidy, the IRRs of these projects tend to be below 10%, at which point of time it's very hard to invest equity capital. So again, it's a little bit of chicken and egg, like until the government actually approves the application for the subsidy, none of these semiconductor fabs are viable. And for it to be viable, it needs to meet the conditions of the subsidy grant, which I think both parties are probably falling short of right now.
All right. Pallav, we were briefly touching upon this before the show began, and that is we have grand plans. We, of course, want to build an entire ecosystem. $10 billion is up for grabs, but we are seeing applicants who are not meeting criteria. Should we be tweaking those criteria? Should we make it easier? Because the money lying in government coffers does not make any sense if it's not utilized towards its intended cause.
To me, it seems that this was a half-baked announcement. And let's put it bluntly, with two ministers who claim to be technologists of a very high level, both engineers leading the front, that they brought out a policy which has not brought in any key players with good proposals, does not augur well. India definitely needs semiconductors. We are a country which guzzles semiconductors in such a big way. And today, semiconductors are considered the new oil in the 21st century. India is not only floundering on old oil because we import so much, And in trying to make our ecosystem on the new oil, which is chips, we seem to have stumbled once again. It does not augur well. We had our own small fab in Chandigarh, which was then Chandigarh and now Mohali, which got burnt down, and then it subsequently never came up. But since then, we have never recovered. We definitely need semiconductors in a very big way to power our economy. But unless we get our policies right, I don't think you'll be able to get good proposals in simply by putting a money bag there and hoping that people will put a fab in India is not going to work.
Okay. Krishna, Indian semiconductor market is expected to grow to 63, and I'm looking at figures now, $63 billion by 2026. That's a huge market up for grabs. We, of course, want to go out there, go big, and we opened applications for about 45 days as Minister came on record initially in the month of January. Only got 3 serious applications. All of them are stalled at the moment. Do you agree that we've rather failed at it? This was half-baked, should have been done properly. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that I think it's too early for an assessment at this stage. We even saw the opportunity during the course of the pandemic, and from then on the plans have been, and in that sense we reacted fast enough to first of all come up with a plan, and we're talking about January 2022, nearly a year and a half ago. Exactly a year and a half ago, when the India Semiconductor Mission was launched by the government of India. And 45 days into it is when, for the 45-day period is when the tender was open, and by February 2022, the tender was closed. And from then on to now, 15 months hence, the second round of tenders, applications have been, put open. So in that sense, I think the process it's been a process of learning as well for the government in terms of how to set up this. Because let's face it, we don't have prior capabilities. We're setting this up from scratch here in India at a time when the global semiconductor industry is going through such a huge churn. So there will be learnings, and that's the reason why you saw India's IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw make that trip to the US in the beginning of the month of May this year. Spoke to the people over there because they are the companies who can invest in India for semiconductor chip manufacturing units here in India, and that's really the crux of the matter over here. How do you develop this entire chip manufacturing factories, big ones, many across the country, and make sure that they are sustainable, that they provide employment, and also there is the question of emissions as well.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that the Indian government has allocated about 20,000 megawatt of energy for chip manufacturing can give you an idea of the kind of preparations that India as a country, as a government is making to prepare India and make it into a global semiconductor manufacturing hub. So there is energy allocation, and there's emissions, there's scope 1 emissions, there's scope 2 emissions, scope 3 emissions. So there is a huge balancing act to be played here, even as we harbor these huge ambitions of becoming the biggest semiconductor maker in the world, because you have to take lessons from Taiwan, you have to take lessons from other countries, and you have to make sure that you are sustainable in every single which way to the society around you. Shweta, we always talk about ESG goals, environment and social goals, so you have to be clear about that as well. So even that thought process, I think, is also underway. And that's the reason why you're talking about education, courses, creating a steady talent pool to join this global manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing industry. There's so many factors associated with it. Yes, at this stage it might seem as if it's like one step forward and 2 steps back with this kind of a new tender. What happens to the people who apply, who are the previous applicants? Do they have an unfair advantage? Do the new applicants have a greater advantage? That debate will go on. But the fact of the matter is that these are, I would call, the birthing pangs of India as a global semiconductor hub.
All right. Point well taken. And before I go to Barnik, I want to come to you, Pallav. I think it's a fair assessment to say that it's only been a year and a half. The first sort of window was opened in the month of January of 2022. 45 days. This is the second round when the windows are open once again. But this time there is no definite period. It will remain open unless, of course, government either finds a right contender or finds these applications meeting the deadlines. Are we being too harsh? Of course we harbor plans, but this is a huge market. And as Krishna pointed out, it's too early to take a call on whether it was failed or it was successful. I understand there's a substantial loss of time here. Year and a half means that we have progressed massively on technology, that we have lost money, importing semiconductor chips, that there's been a delay in automobile delivery in India, because largely the entire automobile sector depends on semiconductor chips that we procure from the outside. So while I understand that there have been delays and I understand there's been a loss of time, at the same time, is it too early to make a judgment call?
Shweta, we have to be very fair and objective in our assessment. We are already 4 decades late, and let me say 40 years. India had a semiconductor fab well before many other countries even thought of it. It got burned down and we never ever brought it back. Now, in the 21st century, we make these bold pronouncements and make these pronouncements without following up or understanding what the ecosystem is or how to get the investment or the technology. And then we expect that this would happen just because a bag of money is being put on a rod like a carrot in front of people. It's not going to happen like that. Yes, we need chips. Definitely we need chips. I am the first person to say we need a semiconductor fab in India, not one, many. And I think it's very correct that we are thinking of doing the 40 nanometer and not 28, because that would be much cheaper to put in. The world has gone to 1 nanometer. We are not going there. We understand our limitations, and our big appetite is for 28, 40, 50 nanometer chips. That is where the big market for India is to tap into. And we definitely need it. But at the same time, simply by the government making these pronouncements does not mean that international business partners are going to jump and put fabs. It takes a lot of effort. We are already leaders in designing chips. We are leaders in designing chips for the world. But the hardware part, we have lagged behind. We need to catch up, and we need to catch up double fast. This 1.5 year period and this next till 2024 time which is being given, personally, I don't think this is augurs well. मैं तो यही कहूँगा, ये दिल मांगे मोर, और ये मोर जो है वो बहुत जल्दी चाहिए हमको, चिप जल्दी चाहिए. ऐसे नहीं हो सकता कि हम पीछे खिसकते जाएं और खिसकते जाएं. नहीं, जल्दी चाहिए.
Okay. Pallav wants it quickly, not as quickly as perhaps the government is ready to deliver just as yet. Even private sector for that matter. Government has rolled out a plan. Government has rolled out an incentive worth $1 billion. But is that enough? Because I want to get in Barnik here at this point. Barnik, United States passed the CHIPS Act allocating as much as $280 billion to manufacturing chips. We have earmarked $1 billion. Absolutely no, comparison there with respect to the proportion, the money that has been allocated. But what we have rolled out so far, is that enough to get industry quickly moving, or at least have some sort of, uptick in interest from domestic players?
Yeah, so again, I believe the amount is not enough. And again, reacting to Pallav's point, I think we have also seen countries like China who burnt nearly $200 to $250 billion and not created a fab industry just because the technology and quality was not there. So if you look at any fab, and if you look at even the 28 nanometer kind of fabs which are coming up, capital investment in these facilities can be anywhere between $4 to $10 billion, of which typically 50-60% subsidies are needed, right? So a $10 billion allocation can only help set up 1 or 2 fabs in India, right? So while that's a good start, I don't think you can create a full ecosystem of semiconductors unless you're willing to spend at least $50 to $100 billion. So again, the amount is inadequate, but this should be adequate to put 1 or 2 fabs, right? Where I think the private sector needs to do a better job of getting technology partners. But again, I would advocate for patience, because the worst thing to do is to spend $10 billion and have fabs which produce poor quality chips which can't be used by anyone else.
All right, patience is the key. We absolutely agree with that. And patience, Krishna, is something I think we are all patiently sitting, we're all patiently waiting. But if 40 years is how long it's taken, I understand initial attempts were not as serious and as concerted as the ones we're seeing now.
Also, a lot has
and a
happened
new
since-
entire mission that has been launched for semiconductor, advisory groups formed. There's momentum at the top notch.
Yeah, you're absolutely right in that front, in the sense that all these advisory groups and all this action has happened in the last year and a half. But yes, we've been waiting for a semiconductor industry for, have we been waiting for a semiconductor industry for 40 years? Yeah, definitely. I have absolutely no questions. I completely agree with Mr. Pallava Bagla on that front. But the fact of the matter is that India has been leapfrogging so many technologies. When they, let me talk about something like cloud. When big data and data is going to be the data storage and servers was going to be the big business. The question was whether India will have the space for these companies to create these servers and etc. etc. But suddenly, how quickly did we see all that big data move to the cloud? And suddenly we need no infrastructure. And all those companies in the West and all those economies in the West that invested in creating data infrastructure, data storage infrastructure, so
it was all made redundant.
Yeah, they continue using it because
Yes.
they created it. But India can leapfrog that.
Absolutely.
India can leapfrog the physical data storage server. India is leapfrogging it. Literally every company, big and small in India, has all its data up on the cloud today. So similarly, when it comes to the semiconductor industry, in today's day and age, let's not talk about 40 years ago, and then Taiwan happened, and so much happened. Now China is happening, and China is suddenly not happening. There's so much, churn within the semiconductor industry in the recent years. I'd say that, for the new age, the new dawn of a semiconductor industry, yes, India is primed for it. India has the space, India has the knowledge, India has the people. Most importantly, trained, educated young people available. So it's all fine, but all of that needs to be put into in perfect symphony, so that the semiconductor industry has the right beginnings in the right place. I mean, if you have failed in 40 years, and it's better late than never, but better started. When they say a job well started is half done. So I think India, I would say I'd be an optimist and say India taking its own sweet time in terms of arriving at its semiconductor policy and the finalities of it all is a good thing, so that the right solutions and the right decisions are made eventually, despite the initial hiccups.
Right decisions, of course, we're hoping will be made. But I want to come to you, Pallava, at this point. And I think what is also important to understand is that policymakers doing what they can in a year and a half's time may not be enough. 40 years put into making India a chip export hub hasn't really materialized on ground. But what, in your assessment, would be, perhaps what would you like to tell policymakers to do better? What is the value judgment you'd like to add as to what government can do better to ensure that India becomes the right sort of ecosystem, not lose the momentum that has been generated over years for chip manufacturing?
Well, I'm neither an elected member of the parliament, and it's way above my pay grade to try and pontify on what is needed by the country. But definitely the policy was half-baked and it didn't work. That's very straightforward and simple. Now, I don't know how many people have actually been into a fab. I have actually been into a fab. The way it is made out, that it is so high-tech and it is so difficult to make and so cumbersome, the technology is out of the reach? Certainly not. If India decides to put its foot forward and get its act together with its own homegrown technologists, we can get our own fab. And we are not going for 5 nanometer, 10 nanometer, 1 nanometer chips. We are going for the less expensive fabs which can create bigger chips. And some of the know-how exists with our own people. We just need to have faith in them and repose that faith and move forward. If we constantly look over our shoulders and try to get a technology partner from overseas, you will see stumbling blocks. Right now, you are seeing stumbling blocks on a tendering process. You will also see stumbling blocks when geopolitical and geostrategic reasons come into the picture. Currently, India is the favored boy because everybody wants a assured and a democratic country supplying essential parts. So India is looked upon favorably, but nobody wants a competitor in in the whole business of chip manufacturing. So if India becomes a big player, it is trouble for South Korea, it is trouble for Taiwan, it is trouble for America. America lost its steam when it let South Korea and Taiwan take the lead. But then we need to take some hard decisions, bold decisions,
Okay.
and we just can't keep leaving it forever. I mean, to get the right tender in.
In which case, I have to ask, if we can't keep waiting, what is the future looking like? And let me bring in Barnik here. Barnik, do you agree that perhaps it's time to develop our own sort of technology if we are not able to find the right partner? How easy it is to say it as opposed to do it? Is it easy to develop that sort of technology without having to partner with somebody abroad?
You have to remember that ultimately the consumers of these semicon fabs or panel fabs have their own specifications. It's very hard to create an indigenous industry unless it's technologically certified. So I think it is very hard to do this indigenously. I think the reason is, if you look at the way the industry has consolidated into Taiwan, right? It's very hard. I would disagree that you can just do it yourself. Now again, question on what we need to do differently. I think the government should really look at whether its current obsession of getting a couple of fabs up and running soon is the right strategy, right? Because at the end of the day, we have to create a full ecosystem, right? Which is a cluster-based ecosystem. And we have to ensure whether we are starting at the right end of the value chain, right? Maybe encouraging players to participate in parts of the value chain which have slightly lower barriers. And we spoke about one, the outsourced semiconductor assembly and test, right? Maybe a better starting point, right? I think geopolitically also, I know the Minister Vaishnav's visit to the US was, in my opinion, quite prescient, right? I think we do need technology if we want our fabs up and running and commercially viable within a few quarters, right? So I think some strategic push at the government to government level to encourage international partners to tie up with our local entrepreneurs, whether it be the big industrial groups or any other companies, may be actually a better, more sound strategy than just expecting the local Indian industry to get the partners, because it seems as of now, no one has managed to assemble anyone. So again, a little bit more government to government push, maybe playing the right side of the geopolitics.
Okay.
As a counterpoint to North Asia, and maybe partnering with the US may be a more sounder strategy to get technology partnerships into India.
Okay. I think Pallava would want to say something. Yes, Pallava, please go ahead.
We have this ambition of making semiconductor chips, but we are talking of making of an ecosystem. Please don't forget, we have eroded and made our electronics industry almost non-existent in the country. Even if you make the chips, who will use them when you don't have a local semiconductor industry? Except for using it in LCD bulbs or something, or LED bulbs, where will you use them? You're importing almost all your electronic stuff. We used to have domestic electronic big industries which have slowly but steadily died out because imports from China and South Korea became cheap. So even if you get a fab, who will use them? When you expect Apple to start using an Indian-made chip on their phone, or you expect a Samsung to start using an Indian-made chip on their Samsung phone?
Why not?
No.
I'm going to be. I'm sorry. I'm going to play the devil's advocate there. But why not? If Apple can come and start manufacturing in India, why not you use India-made chips? What's the harm in that?
Well, one of those chips, we are not trying to make the chips which will go into Apple phones or those smartphones.
Okay.
Those are much finer grade chips. Let's not go there. But at the same time, when somebody is making or assembling sets, they will get their own chips. Why will they make it? Why will they take an India-made chip? India-made chip will be used by the Indian local electronics industry. Mm-hmm. So, and once I interviewed Dr. Ajay Chaudhary, who's the founder of HCL, and he told me a very characteristic statement, and repeat that for the benefit of our viewers. He said, we have a hole in the hole. The hole is the chip. And the whole is the ecosystem where we don't have an electronics industry. So even if you get the chip, where do you use it? So we have, while I'm very impatient to get the chip, but the ecosystem is also necessary for the local electronics industry to rev up.
Okay, interesting point of view. Barnik, would you like to comment on that? It's interesting if you
Yes.
don't really have a thriving, robust electronics segment industry, where do you use these chips? What is the possibility of exporting these chips?
No, no, we don't need to export it. We have enough electronics consumption in India. It's just that it's not manufactured by Indian players. You have enough assembly of chips. So as long as the chip meets global standards, it will be used both locally and globally, right? That's why the government's emphasis on a technology partnership, right? If you have a technology partnership, if the chip is globally certified and if it is used, right, then why wouldn't someone who's importing a chip today use it? So again, which is why the emphasis on having quality and emphasis of having a technology partnership. The fact is that we are importing, we are consuming electronics. Any end user electronics industry is growing between 12 to 15%. A lot of it is assembled in India, right? A lot of it is assembled and even semi-manufactured in India. All these units are importing chips as they're assembling. If you have a factory in India which is producing a world-class chip, it will get used in India first. So again, I disagree that there is no usage. This is the entire thesis behind the policy. We don't want to import any chips.
Okay, interesting debate there, but we'll have to wind up. And so I have just under a minute to get last few comments from both of you. Barnik, starting with you. With the current pace with which we are importing chips, what's the sort of money that will be spent, and how do you see the electronic chip making manufacturing market being thriving in India? Do you see that there is a possibility of any of these three applications to either move forward or new applicants to emerge? Because Tata Group has expressed its interest, but there is no sort of momentum there. So how do you see the manufacturing capabilities from India emerging in the short run?
So listen, I am a little skeptical of anything happening over the next 3 to 5 quarters. I am far more hopeful if we take a 3 to 5 year lens, right? Because again, it's not easy. With best efforts, the policy has not worked. I would not necessarily criticize the government a lot. Not a lot of countries have succeeded. China failed spectacularly despite investing $150 billion. So again, I think we should have to be thoughtful and measured. I think more strategic dialogue at the country to country level and probably getting a serious chip manufacturer for the US or maybe Taiwan to get interested in manufacturing in India may be the right path for the industry to take off. I think the Indian industry players like Tata are focusing on the right element of the value chain, but even they will take some time to get these facilities up and running. So in the near term, I'm very pessimistic on great progress, but more optimistic in the 3 to 5 year time horizon.
Okay, 3 to 5 year horizon. Pallava, do you agree with that? Are you giving it 3 to 5 years? I understand you're not very happy with the progress we've made so far.
Certainly not happy. We need it fast. We need it quick. We need ministers who are thinking on their feet. We need ministers who can deliver, not ministers who are creating excuses and letting the policy almost die. The impression when the Indian Semiconductor Mission was announced was that we'll get something running soon. It never happened. And now we are talking way past the next general election. Who knows what will happen? While I'm very keen to have a semiconductor fab in India, if the international partners are not, let's get on going with our domestic expertise and see something going.
Okay.
As and when we need, we are not going for those fine chips of 1, 2, 10 nanometers, 40 nanometer. We have that technology. I don't agree with people who say, I have personally walked into fabs and seen them in India. There are existing fabs, by the way. They may not be large, they may not be as automated, but there are people who are creating these chips for the strategic sector. So the technology and the know-how exists.
Okay.
We somehow need to get our act together.
All right. Barnik, Pallava, thanks very much for joining with your inputs on that story. Last word to you, Krishna. It appears that we have ambitious plans. We've been talking about those ambitions. We also haven't really lived up to those ambitions so far. Year and a half is not enough time. absolutely not enough time to be able to realize any dream, and in this case, a massive technology dream there. Window open for 45 days initially, now it's open indefinitely, which means more applicants are likely to show interest.
That's the hope.
That's the hope. An interesting point made by Pallava there. We have capabilities, we have technology for the 40 nanometer chip. I don't know if that is true or not, that's his experience, but if we do, then it shouldn't prevent us from moving very quickly in, and manufacturing in India.
Like all other businesses in India, the speed with which you can formulate a policy, and also the trust that chip makers are able to have in the Indian government, being able to give them what they need, the subsidies that they need, the infrastructure that they need to have a profitable chip manufacturing business in India. That's the real key over here. The only thing that we're left to see is that, yes, okay, India started this process out about a year and a half ago. Now seems to have come a full circle. It's just done a whole revamp of its process. Now chip makers of all sizes, small and big, are able to apply old and new. Now the question is, will this be trusted by the people with the big bucks?
Right.
Will they come in, invest, and start the factories? That's the big question. And when that happens, it'll be news right here on Business Plus.